The judge asked me to state my name for the record, and before I could open my mouth, my mother stood up and said, "She has no right to use that name in this courtroom." I watched her smooth the front of her Escada blazer like she'd just swatted a fly. My sister, seated beside her, didn't even look up from her phone. I straightened my back, feeling the weight of every ribbon pinned to my Coast Guard dress blues, and said it anyway. "Petty Officer, First Class Rowan Kessler." The microphone caught it clean. My mother's jaw tightened. That was the moment I understood this wasn't about a house or money. It was about whether I was allowed to exist in their version of the story. Let me take you back. I grew up on Laguerre Street in Charleston, South Carolina, in a house that looked like it belonged on a postcard. White columns, black shutters, a wraparound porch, where my mother hosted garden club luncheons every third Saturday. The Pemberton family had been Charleston royalty since before the Civil War, and my mother, Marlene Pemberton Kessler, never let anyone forget it. She married my father, Rear Admiral Hugh Kessler, because he had the kind of military pedigree that paired well with old money. Together, they were untouchable. Cocktail parties at the yacht club, winter galas at Hibernian Hall, a feature in Charleston magazine every other year. My sister Corinne was the masterpiece. She played cello at the Dock Street Theater, graduated summa cum laude from Washington and Lee, and married a hedge fund analyst before she turned 26. Her engagement announcement ran in the Post and Courier with a photo so polished it could have been a campaign ad. Corinne never raised her voice. She never needed to. She could destroy you with a single raised eyebrow and a well-placed silence. And then there was me. I climbed live oaks until my knees bled. I rebuilt a dirt bike engine in the garage when I was 14. I watched rescue helicopter footage on repeat, mesmerized by the swimmers who dropped into churning seas to pull strangers from the dark. I knew what I wanted before I could name it. I wanted to save people. The night I told my parents I was enlisting in the Coast Guard, we were sitting in the formal dining room. Candles lit, linen napkins, the works. My father set down his fork with surgical precision. He didn't yell, he didn't need to. He looked at me like I'd tracked mud across a white carpet and said, "No daughter of mine will enlist. Officers lead, enlisted serve. You want to throw away your legacy to be someone's subordinate?" I told him I didn't want to lead from behind a desk. I wanted to jump out of helicopters. My mother laughed. Not a real laugh, the decorative kind she used when someone said something embarrassing at brunch. "Rowan, darling, women don't jump out of helicopters, they chair committees." Corinne sipped her wine and said nothing. She didn't have to. Her silence was its own verdict. I left for boot camp 3 weeks later. Nobody drove me to the airport. I took a cab at 4 a.m., my duffel bag stuffed with everything that mattered, which turned out to be very little. My father didn't shake my hand. My mother didn't cry. Corinne texted me a single line 2 days after I arrived at Cape May. "Mom redecorated your room. It's a reading nook now." That was it. I wasn't erased violently. I was erased efficiently, the way you'd remove a stain from upholstery. The first year was brutal. Aviation Survival Technician School wasn't designed to be survived. It was designed to break you and see what was left. Out of 23 candidates in my class, 4 of us graduated. I was the only woman. The pool sessions were the worst, treading water in full gear while instructors simulated drowning victims, clawing at your face. I swallowed so much chlorine I could taste it in my sleep. But every time my lungs burned and my legs threatened to quit, I thought about that dining room. I thought about my mother's decorative laugh, and I kicked harder. My first real rescue was off the coast of Oregon. A commercial fishing vessel had capsized in 30-foot swells. The pilot couldn't get close enough, so they lowered me on the cable into water so cold it felt like being stabbed. I found the first fisherman tangled in netting, hypothermic, barely conscious. I cut him free, clipped him to the basket, and signaled for the hoist. Then I dove back under. The second man was already face down. I flipped him, cleared his airway, started compressions while the waves tried to rip us apart. He coughed up seawater somewhere between the third and fourth compression. When we got him into the helicopter, the flight mechanic, a guy named Dustin who'd barely spoken to me in 3 months, looked at me and said, "Damn, Kessler." That was all. 2 words. But they meant more to me than 4 years of report cards my parents never acknowledged. I didn't call home after that rescue. I didn't call home after any of them. Not after the capsized sailboat off Kodiak. Not after the medevac from a burning cargo ship in the Bering Sea. Not after I earned the Coast Guard medal for pulling 2 children from a submerged vehicle during a flash flood in Louisiana while off duty, still in my running shoes. That one made the local news. I wondered if my mother saw it. I wondered if she changed the channel. I found out she did see it years later from Miss Trudy. Miss Trudy had been the Pemberton family's cook since before I was born. She made shrimp and grits that could make a grown man weep, and she was the only person in that house who ever treated me like I mattered. She called me on my birthday every year without fail, even when nobody else did. "Your mama saw that news clip," she told me. "She turned off the TV and told your sister that girl is going to embarrass this family on a national level." I laughed when Trudy told me that. The kind of laugh that burns going down. Here's the thing about being erased from a family. It doesn't happen all at once. It's 1,000 small cuts. The Christmas card that lists everyone's name except yours. The family portrait taken while you're deployed, hung above the mantel in a gilded frame. The alumni newsletter your mother edits for the church, where Corinne's accomplishments take up half a column and your name appears nowhere. After a while, you stop expecting to be included. You stop checking. And that numbness, that deliberate blindness you develop just to keep functioning, they mistake it for not caring. But you care. God, you care so much it turns your stomach. The call came on a Wednesday. I was at Air Station Sitka, Alaska, halfway through a maintenance check on my dry suit. My commanding officer walked in with that look, the one that means someone's dying or already dead. "Kessler, it's your father. Massive stroke. They're saying it's bad." Corinne's message was waiting on my phone. "Dad's in the ICU at Muse C. Mom wants you here. Not we want you here. Mom wants you." Like I was a contractor being summoned for a job. I flew commercial because emergency leave processing took 18 hours. By the time I landed in Charleston, my uniform was wrinkled and I smelled like recycled airplane air. I took an Uber to the hospital because nobody offered to pick me up. When I walked into the ICU, my mother looked at me, looked at my uniform, and said, "You couldn't have changed? This isn't a recruitment booth, Rowan." My father was unrecognizable. The man who once commanded a carrier strike group couldn't move the left side of his face. Tubes everywhere. Monitors beeping in that flat, indifferent rhythm that sounds nothing like a heartbeat. I took his hand. His fingers twitched. I don't know if that was him or just a reflex, but I held on anyway. Corinne arrived the next morning in a white linen pantsuit, Hermes bag tucked under her arm. She spent 45 minutes at his bedside, most of it on the phone with her husband discussing a renovation timeline for their Kiowa Island house. When she left, she told the charge nurse to keep her posted and handed her a business card. Like our father was a client, I stayed. For 6 weeks, I stayed. I converted my emergency leave into convalescent leave and then burned through my remaining PTO. I learned his medication schedule, his physical therapy routine, his blood pressure patterns. I changed his catheter bag. I cleaned the bedsore forming on his left hip. I read him the newspaper every morning because his eyes would track the sound of my voice, and I convinced myself that meant something. One afternoon, I was adjusting his pillows when my mother walked in with 2 women from her garden club. She saw me in scrubs, my hair pulled back, hands still damp from washing, and said to her friends, "This is Rowan. She's been helping with Hugh's care. She has some medical training from her service." The way she said service made it sound like a prison sentence. Her friends smiled politely. One of them whispered to the other as they left. I heard the word enlisted like it was a diagnosis. But there were quiet moments, moments that cut through everything. One night, around 2 a.m., I was dozing in the chair beside his bed when I felt pressure on my hand. I opened my eyes. My father was looking at me. Not through me, his lips moved. I leaned in close. "Stayed," he whispered. One word. His eyes were wet. I nodded. I stayed. He died 11 days later. I was holding his hand when it happened. The monitors screamed. Nurses rushed in, but I already knew. I felt the exact moment his grip softened into nothing. I sat there for a long time after they turned off the machines. Nobody came to check on me. Nobody called. My mother was at the house, asleep. Corinne was in Atlanta. I called Corinne at 6 a.m. She answered on the fourth ring, voice thick with sleep. "Is it done?" she asked. Not "is he gone" or "what happened?" "Is it done?" Like he was a task on her to-do list. The funeral was a military affair, full honors, flag-draped casket, rifle salute. My mother planned every detail and seated me in the third row, behind family friends and her garden club president. I didn't fight it. I watched from the back as Corinne delivered a eulogy so polished and empty it could have been a press release. Our father was a man of discipline, dignity, and devotion to duty. She didn't mention that he loved fishing in the Edisto River, or that he secretly watched Jeopardy every night, or that his favorite meal was fried catfish from a gas station in Beaufort. She didn't know any of that. She wasn't there. 3 weeks after the funeral, I received a certified letter from the law offices of Carlton Vickers. I opened it standing in the parking lot of my apartment complex back in Sitka, Alaska, sea wind cutting through my jacket. The letter informed me that my father's estate was being contested. Corinne, acting as executor, had filed a motion to exclude me from the inheritance entirely, citing prolonged estrangement and lack of familial bond. Attached was an affidavit signed by my mother, claiming I had been emotionally abusive and manipulative during the decedent's final illness, and had administered unauthorized medical care that may have accelerated his decline. I read that sentence 3 times. Administered unauthorized medical care that may have accelerated his decline. I had wiped his forehead. I had held his hand. I had kept him alive for 6 weeks while they sipped cocktails and mailed Christmas cards, and now they were calling it murder. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor of my apartment, back against the wall, listening to the wind howl off the Sitka Sound. I thought about walking away, letting them have it all. The house, the money, the story, what did it matter? I had my career, my crew, my purpose. But then I remembered his voice in the dark. Stayed. He saw me. He knew. And I wasn't going to let them bury that. I called Nina Okafor the next morning. She ran a veterans legal aid clinic in Savannah and had a reputation for not losing. Her voice was calm, direct, no polish. "Tell me everything," she said. "Don't edit, don't soften, don't skip the parts that make you look bad." So I told her 3 hours on the phone, every memory, every slight, every Thanksgiving I ate alone, every photo I wasn't in, every voicemail I left that was never returned. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "They think they're fighting a grieving daughter. They don't know they picked a fight with a rescue swimmer." The weeks before the hearing were methodical. Nina built the case like a hull, layer by layer. We gathered hospital visitor logs showing my 6 weeks of daily presence versus Corinne's 3 visits totaling 9 hours. We pulled phone records, 217 calls I made to the house over 12 years, 11 returned. We documented every medication I administered, cross-referenced with the attending physician's orders, all authorized, all documented, all by the book. But the thing that changed everything came from the most unexpected place. One evening, a FedEx envelope arrived at my apartment. No return address, just a Charleston postmark. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note on plain paper. They tried to buy my silence. I kept the receipt. JR. I plugged it in. The drive contained a video file, timestamped from the hospital security system. It showed Corinne in the hallway outside my father's room, speaking to a hospital administrator. The audio was muffled, but the lip reader Nina hired later confirmed the key phrase. "We need the visitor logs adjusted." She was never here that often. There was also a scanned image of a personal check, $30,000, written by Corinne to a Janine Ridley, my father's night nurse, dated 1 week after his death. The memo line read consulting services. Janine never cashed it. Instead, she kept it and mailed it to me. The night before the hearing, I ironed my dress blues. I polished my shoes until they reflected the ceiling light. I laid out every ribbon, every commendation, and pinned them with the care of someone building an altar. My phone rang at 2200. Unknown number, encrypted prefix, Kessler. I recognized the voice immediately. Captain Lyle Dietrich, my former commanding officer at Air Station Kodiak. The man had pulled me from a training exercise once when he thought I was pushing too hard, not to discipline me, but to tell me that dying in practice was a waste of a perfectly good swimmer. "Heard you've got a fight tomorrow," he said. "I don't know who told you that, sir. Doesn't matter. Listen to me. You've pulled people out of the ocean in the dark in 50-degree water in 20-foot seas. A courtroom's just a room. Hold your line." He paused. "And Kessler?" "I'll be there." The line went dead. I slept 3 hours, not from nerves. From discipline I'd operated on less. The courtroom in Charleston was old, all dark wood and tall windows that let in too much light. I arrived early. Nina was already there, going over notes by the water cooler like we were prepping for a budget review. "You ready?" she asked. "I've been ready." When I walked in, Corinne looked up from her legal pad. She was wearing ivory, of course. Her lawyer, Vickers, sat beside her like a bulldog in a bespoke suit. My mother was in the front row, pearls tight around her throat, back straight as a headstone. She didn't look at me. She looked through me, which was worse. The first hour was Vickers' show. He painted me as a volatile, unstable woman who had abandoned her family for a manual labor government job and returned only when an inheritance was at stake. He played a clip from the hospital, security footage of me raising my voice at a night shift nurse who'd missed a medication window. Out of context, I looked aggressive. In context, I was saving my father from a dosing error. But context wasn't Vickers' concern. He displayed printed emails I'd sent to Corinne during my deployments. Lines I'd written in exhaustion and frustration, pulled from threads and stripped of everything around them. "I'm done pretending this family is normal. You've never once asked if I'm alive." He read them aloud with theatrical disappointment, like a principal reading a confession. My mother dabbed her eyes. Corinne nodded slowly, performing sadness like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. Then came something I wasn't prepared for. Vickers called a psychiatrist, someone I'd never met, who testified that based on my military service history and exposure to repeated trauma, I likely suffered from untreated PTSD that made me a risk to vulnerable individuals, including the decedent. He used those words, risk to vulnerable individuals, like I was a hazard, like every life I'd saved was irrelevant because someone with a degree decided I was broken. I felt my chest tighten, not panic, rage, the quiet kind that sits behind your ribs and waits. I looked at Nina. She gave me a single nod. Hold. It was Nina's turn. She didn't grandstand. She didn't raise her voice. She laid out the visitor logs. She presented the attending physician's sworn statement, confirming that every medication I administered was prescribed, documented, and appropriate. She showed the phone records. She showed the Christmas cards with my name missing. She showed a photo of the family portrait on the mantle. 5 people, no Rowan. Then she played the full security footage. Not Vickers' edited clip, the complete sequence. In it, you could see me noticing the medication error, alerting the nurse, calmly resolving the situation. My voice was firm but controlled. The nurse later submitted a written statement confirming I was correct and may have prevented a serious adverse event. The courtroom stirred. My mother's posture shifted. Corinne whispered something to Vickers. and then the door opened. Captain Lyle Dietrich walked in wearing his full dress uniform, metals catching the light from those tall windows. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, the kind of presence that makes a room go still just by entering. He didn't look at Corinne. He didn't look at my mother. He walked to the front and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, I'm Captain Lyle Dietrich, United States Coast Guard. I served as Petty Officer Kessler's commanding officer for 4 years. I'm here because someone tried to tell this court that she's unstable, and I cannot in good conscience let that stand." Vickers objected. The judge overruled. Dietrich spoke plainly. He described the rescue off Kodiak, where I swam through debris and fuel slicks to reach a capsized crew. He described the flash flood in Louisiana, where I entered a submerged vehicle without backup and extracted 2 children, ages 4 and 7, in under 90 seconds. He described my service record: 0 disciplinary actions, 4 commendations, 1 Coast Guard medal. Then he opened his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. "This," he said, "was filed with my office 18 months ago by Rear Admiral Hugh Kessler." He handed it to the judge. "It's a formal commendation nomination and personal statement. The Admiral requested it be sealed until after his death." The room went silent. The judge opened the folder. Inside, as Dietrich explained, was a letter in my father's handwriting. The judge read a portion aloud. "My daughter Rowan chose a path I did not understand and could not support publicly. That failure is mine. She has served with a courage I recognize because I have spent my life around it. She did not earn her place because of my name. She earned it in spite of it." I stopped breathing. "He wrote this while he was still lucid," Dietrich said. "He asked me to hold it. He told me that if his family ever tried to diminish her service, this letter was to be presented. He used the word when, not if." My mother's face went white. Corinne's pen froze mid-stroke. For the first time in my life, I saw my sister look genuinely afraid. Nina stood. "One final piece of evidence, Your Honor." She entered the USB drive into the record. The video played on the courtroom screen. Corinne in the hospital hallway, asking the administrator to alter visitor logs. Then the check appeared. $30,000. Corinne's signature. Janine Ridley's name. Consulting services. Vickers tried to object. The judge cut him off. Then Janine herself walked in. Small woman, quiet, the kind of person you'd pass without noticing. She took the stand and explained in a steady voice that Corinne had offered her the money to destroy the original visitor logs and provide a statement that I was rarely present during my father's care. "I couldn't do it," she said, "because it wasn't true. Rowan was there every single day. She slept in that chair. She talked to him even when he couldn't talk back. I've been a nurse for 22 years, and I've never seen a family member fight that hard." My mother pressed her handkerchief to her lips. Not in grief, in something closer to reckoning. The judge didn't deliberate long. Based on the evidence presented, including the documented care provided by Petty Officer Kessler, the sworn statements of medical professionals, the clear and unambiguous intent expressed in Rear Admiral Kessler's personal letter, and the deeply troubling evidence of witness tampering, this court rules in favor of Rowan Kessler. The estate, including the Legary Street property, is awarded as specified in the original will. The motion to exclude is denied. The gavel came down like a period at the end of a sentence I'd been writing my whole life. I didn't look at my mother. I didn't look at Corinne. I stood, turned, and walked out into the Charleston sun. The air smelled like salt marsh and jasmine. Captain Dietrich was waiting by the steps. He didn't say anything. He just extended his hand. I shook it, and for a second, neither of us let go. Nina found me later, sitting on a bench by the battery, watching the harbor. She sat beside me and said nothing for a long time. Then, "How do you feel?" I thought about it. Like I just surfaced after a very deep dive. That night, my mother texted me. One line, "You've humiliated this family beyond repair." I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Then I locked the phone and set it face down on the nightstand. Corinne called 2 days later. Her voice was different, softer, almost gentle, which I'd learned to distrust. Rowan, listen. That was all very dramatic, but let's be adults about this. The Spoleto fundraiser is next month, and it would look better if we presented a united front. People are talking. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, Corinne, we are not a united front. We never were. You tried to erase me from his hospital records. You tried to erase me from his life, and when that didn't work, you tried to erase me from his death. I'm done. She made a small sound, something between a scoff and a gasp. You're being dramatic. I'm being clear. Lose my number. I hung up. My hand shook for exactly 10 seconds. Then it stopped. I moved into the house on Laguerre Street on a Thursday in October. The shutters needed paint. The garden was a wreck. My mother's touch was everywhere. The damask curtains, the silver candlesticks, the curated bookshelves full of volumes no one had read. I didn't throw anything out right away. I just moved through the rooms slowly, letting the house learn my shape. In my father's study, I found a drawer that stuck. I worked it open with a butter knife and found a cigar box wedged in the back. Inside were 3 things: a faded photo of me at age 9, standing on the bow of his fishing boat with my arms spread wide like I was flying; a newspaper clipping from the Louisiana rescue, my name circled in blue ink; and a sticky note in his handwriting, pressed to the back of the photo: "Brave girl." I closed the box and sat on the floor for a long time. I didn't display those things on a shelf or frame them on the wall. I put the box back in the drawer. Some things don't need to be exhibited. They just need to be known. The weeks turned into months. I sanded and repainted the porch railing myself. I ripped out the ornamental hedges my mother had maintained like sculptures and planted rosemary and tomatoes instead. Miss Trudy drove up from James Island one Saturday with a cooler full of shrimp and a bottle of hot sauce, and we cooked together in the kitchen, windows open, radio on, laughing about nothing important. She told me the house smelled different. "Smells like somebody actually lives here now," she said. I joined a women veterans group that met Tuesday evenings at a community center near the Citadel. We sat in folding chairs and drank weak coffee and talked about things that civilians never ask about: the boredom of deployment, the guilt of surviving, the weird grief of missing a life you chose to leave. A woman named Marguerite, a former Army Black Hawk pilot who'd lost partial hearing in one ear from rotor noise, told me something I carry to this day. The hardest rescue is the one where you have to save yourself. One morning in early spring, I walked into the backyard with a cup of black coffee and stood barefoot on the damp grass. The azaleas were blooming, pink and defiant against the old brick wall. I noticed a bare patch in the corner where a dogwood tree had once stood, dead now, pulled out years ago after a hurricane. I drove to a nursery on Highway 17, bought a young magnolia, and spent the afternoon planting it. The dirt under my fingernails felt more honest than anything that had ever happened in that house. I didn't plant it for my father. I didn't plant it against my mother. I planted it because I wanted something in that yard that I chose, something that would grow because I decided to put it there and take care of it, not because someone else arranged it for appearance. The house isn't a monument. It's not a trophy. Some days it still feels too big, too quiet, too full of ghosts I didn't invite. But it's mine. Not because a judge said so, but because I earned it the only way I know how. By showing up when no one else would, by staying when it was easier to leave, and by refusing to let the people who should have loved me the hardest convince me I was worth nothing. If you've been listening this long, I want to say something to you directly. If there's someone in your life who made you feel invisible, who edited you out of the story, and then blamed you for not being in the picture, I need you to hear this. Their version of you is not the truth. The truth is in what you do when the water's dark and the waves are high and no one's watching. The truth is in the staying. I don't know if my mother will ever call. I don't know if Corinne will ever understand what she tried to destroy. But I know this: I pulled strangers from the ocean in the middle of the night and I pulled myself from a family that wanted me to drown. And both of those things required the same skill, the willingness to swim toward the thing that terrifies you, not away from it. The magnolia bloomed this past April. One single white flower, small and stubborn, opening toward the Charleston sky like it had something to prove. I stood there with my coffee and watched it for a long time. I didn't take a photo. I didn't tell anyone. Some victories are just for you.